Hello, I'm Nick Crawley. This is the Bible for Life Ministry, and this video is an introduction to the Old Testament book of Exodus. Exodus is 40 chapters long. It's the second book in the Pentateuch, and it builds on the first book, the book of Genesis. Now, Genesis is a book about beginnings. It tells a whole number of different beginnings, but principally it tells the beginning of God's dealings with human beings. And this is focused on Abraham, whom God comes to and makes a covenant with and renames him Abraham. And the book of Exodus is the story of what God does in fulfillment of the very promises that he made to Abraham, what God does to look after Abraham's children, and by that stage, that's several hundred years later, to his family. They're in slavery in Egypt. And God intervenes to save them and rescue them. So there are a number of progressions that take place in the book. First of all, they're in Egypt, and the book tells how they journey into the desert to Mount Sinai. The second progression is that it begins with them in Egypt building what Pharaoh wants, big buildings and whatever. And it describes the progression from there to a place where they're in the desert building a tabernacle for worship of Yahweh there. It is primarily the story of Moses. God comes to Moses and takes him. He's an elderly man of about 80, and God takes him and uses him to lead his people out of slavery and into the promised land. That is his job description, as it were. So Exodus is a story of God intervening, and he does so in a whole number of different ways. It's rather extraordinary, really. There's humanity is just getting on, and there got Abraham's family, and God comes and God changes everything. It is about the giving of law, God and law, and particularly in terms of a covenant. Now, it's fascinating to watch this. If you look at God's interventions in people's lives in the Old Testament, again and again God comes and God forms covenant with people. He formed another covenant with King David later on. And so God comes to his people, and at Mount Sinai he begins to reveal his character. He begins to reveal what he wants his people to do. And this is enshrined in the Ten Commandments and in the covenant there. And then the first statements are that you are, here we are, I am the Lord your God, who brought you up out of Egypt. You are to have no other gods apart from me. You shall not make any graven images or commit idolatry or worship in this way. And this is another of the great themes of Exodus, is God comes to Moses and says, you're to go to Pharaoh and you're to say, let my people go that they may worship me. Worship is absolutely central. And what we find is that as Abraham's descendants are delivered through the Red Sea and through the Passover and all that goes on, and then they come through into the desert and they form covenant with God, worship is at the very centre of that. Worship, we are to worship God first and only. And we are to, and then the final section of the book is 14 chapters describing how the tabernacle is going to be made. The first part, what the plans are, and the second thing, how they built all those plans. It's extraordinary, and you may want to actually skip over that, or at least read it, skim over it very quickly as you read it. Otherwise, you can get bogged down in an awful lot of detail. So, Exodus, this fantastic epic book, it describes the sovereignty of God. It describes his complete rule and his intervention, and the intervention of that sovereign rule. It describes what Revelation is like. That is the revealing of God's character, the revealing of what he wants. There are several crucial points when he does that with Moses. And it describes salvation. It lays the foundation for the great salvation which God is going to do through Christ hundreds of years later. We begin to see the holiness of God, the way he's separate, the way he loves this and he doesn't love that, and he's separate, he's distinct, he's set apart, and we're to follow him. We're to learn to live like him. We see his judgments. We see him intervening and the way he responds to evil, and we see worship and we see atonement, and all these fantastically important themes are birthed in this book of Exodus. So I recommend it to you. It is an epic story, and incidentally, it's no surprise that many films have been made based on these on the stories in Exodus. This is immensely big stuff that we're wrestling with in this book. It's not easy. As I mentioned, there are chapters you may want to probably wisest just to skim over it first time or second time around. Just skim over the concentrated bits and focus on the highlights, on the mountaintops, as it were. One such passage is chapters 32, 33 and 34, where God reveals his glory to Moses. So I commend this to you. Read it in sections, listen to it, think about it, and enjoy it, and start tapping out some of these hugely big treasures in these chapters.